Hey, how's it going? My name's Booker, and in this video I'm going to show you how to build a group chat similar to Slack using React.js and ChatKit, which is a developer tool that my team and I are building here at Pusher. In the end, we'll have an app where users can send and receive messages, see who's typing with nifty typing indicators, and to top it all off, a real-time who's online list. The app we're going to build is going to resemble Slack, and it could well be used for team communication, but I realized, having built the project and recorded the video yesterday, that the concepts and techniques we're going to look at could be used for most types of chat applications, be that a customer messaging app, maybe for a CRM, maybe a group chat for your community, or even in-game chat if you're a game developer. I wanted to quickly mention that all the code is on GitHub, the link is in the description, and I even took the liberty of writing up a step-by-step tutorial based on the exact same code you're going to see in this video. So if you want to follow along, you could maybe watch the video and reference the code on GitHub, it's up to you. If at any point you find yourself enjoying the video, please drop a like on the YouTube video. You can also follow me on Twitter, I'm @BookerCodes. But yeah, I'm excited, let's dive in. Instead of starting from complete scratch, we're going to download a starter template that I created earlier. We'll have a poke around the code in just a second to see exactly what's happening, but first off, download this repository, which you can do by coming here and clicking on download zip, or by copying the link and heading to the terminal where we can run git clone, followed by the link to the repository, followed by the name of the local folder we want to download that code into. If we navigate into that folder, we can run npm install to bring in those local dependencies. Pretty standard stuff. If we open the project up, we can see that there aren't really that many files. In this public folder, we have an index.html file. This mainly exists just to give us something to mount our React application onto. We won't be touching this HTML file going forward. Instead of source, we have some basic React application files, including an empty components directory where we'll be creating some of our components as we go forward. The real meat here is this app.js file, which we'll add more code to as we go forward, but right now just renders a simple component with the text Slack. If we look at package.json, you can see that we're using React scripts to run the React application. And we also have a start script where we can run both the server, which I'll show you in a second, as well as the client, all with one command. The server is actually the main reason this template exists. I didn't want to spend too much time explaining how to set up a simple Express.js server, because if you already know Express, this here is going to look super familiar to you. It does need explaining. If you don't know Express very well, which is totally okay, then it doesn't really matter too much. We're not going to spend very much time on the server. Now, the first thing we're going to want to do when the user loads our application is ask them, what is your username? We'll use this username to create a ChatKit user. To capture that username, we're going to create a username form component, and we're going to create that component inside of the components directory I just showed you. First, we'll import React, then we'll create our username form component. Inside the username form, we'll create a constructor that takes some props, and we'll immediately pass those props to the super function. We'll also set some initial state for our application. Next, we'll create a render function where we'll return a simple form. Whenever this input here is updated or changed, we're going to call this.onChange. And then whenever the form is submitted, we're going to call this.onSubmit. We'll also need to go back up to the constructor and bind both of those functions to this. Nice, so this is a pretty standard React form. What we're doing is we're creating a controlled component, thus that whenever the user enters some inputs, we update our component state. Whenever the form is submitted, we take that component state up here and we pass it to the onSubmit prop, which we expect whoever's referencing this form to pass. In fact, let's reference this form now just to make sure everything is in order. So we'll go to app.js and import username form from components/username form. And then instead of returning just the text Slack, let's return the username form, specify that on submit prop, and we'll just say when we get the username, let's alert it just to make sure things are in order. So that now if I create a new split and run the application using npm run start, or actually we can just do npm start for short, that should spin up a server so that we can go to localhost 3000, enter a username like Booker, and when we hit submit, we can capture that username and show it in an alert. But actually, we don't want to just show it in an alert. Whenever this user enters their username, we want to send that to our server application and create a ChatKit user. But before we can do that, we must first create a ChatKit application or a ChatKit instance. So head to pusher.com/ChatKit and click sign up. You'll have to create a new account. I already have one, so I'll log into an existing account real quick. Once you're at the dashboard, under ChatKit, click create new and create a new ChatKit instance. I'm going to call mine Slack clone. The way ChatKit works essentially is that you install a ChatKit client SDK. There are SDKs for JavaScript, Swift, and Android. We'll be using JavaScript. And then you can subscribe to a room where you'll receive an event every time a new message is sent. On the same client, you can also send messages. You can send plain text or you can send files. So you can send video messages, audio messages, whatever you like. Once you have this kind of fundamental chat in place, it becomes quite easy to add things like typing indicators and online user presence, which I'll show you how to do later in this video. Right now, I just want you to take note of the keys tab in the dashboard where you can see your instance locator and secret key. We'll need these in just a second. Now, most interactions in ChatKit, they happen on the client. Like I just showed you, there are client SDKs for JavaScript, Swift, and Android, and you can even use these libraries together. So you could build a web application as well as an Android application, and they can both communicate using ChatKit, which is kind of cool. But if you head to the docs, you can see that there are both client SDKs and server SDKs. Most interactions with ChatKit happen on the client. That's to say most code we'll write will use the client SDKs, but we'll also need to use the Node.js server SDK to create and manage users. So what I'll do is I'll copy this installation command, head to the terminal, and install Pusher ChatKit server. Now we have that SDK installed, we can open up server.js and import ChatKit from pusher-chatkit-server. And then we can create our own local ChatKit instance by calling new chatkit.default, and we pass to this constructor function, firstly our instance locator, and secondly our secret key, both of which we can access from the dashboard. So let's copy that instance locator and paste it in. And then let's copy that secret key and paste it in like so. Now the main purpose behind this server is to accept a post request from the client with the user's username. When we receive that username, we want to create a ChatKit user with that username. We have to do this on the client because it needs to happen securely. You can only create a user if you have this secret key, and in order for it to be secret, it has to remain on the server. So what we'll do is we'll come down here and create a new routes handler called users that takes a post request. And as soon as that endpoint gets hit, we're going to bring out the username from the request body. Once we have that username, we're going to call ChatKit.createUser, specify the user's name to be username, and we're also going to specify their ID to be equal to the username. When that function is finished executing, we're going to send a status of 2 or 1 to the client to indicate that the user has been created successfully. It's possible that an error will occur. And in this particular case, it's particularly possible that the user enters a username that already exists, a username which is already in use by another ChatKit user for this particular ChatKit instance. In that case, we're going to get a specific error. And for our application, that's actually okay. We don't mind if somebody enters a username that already exists because we're going to assume they're kind of revisiting the application. So what we're going to do is we're going to check the error type and check if it's equal to services/chatkit/user/user underscore already underscore exists. And if the user already exists, we're going to send a status of 200 to indicate that the request was still successful. Otherwise, we're going to send a status equal to the error status code. We're going to relay that from ChatKit to our client. And we're also going to pass down the error JSON just in case we need to do some debugging later down the line. Let's test this out real quick. Let's create a new split and run the server. And then in another split, I'm going to run curl, specify that we want to send a JSON request, a post request, and we'll specify here the username to be equal to foo. And we want to send this post request to HTTP localhost 3001/users. And we should see when we run this that the user is created, and indeed the user is created. Now imagine that the user just entered that username on the form and they created their account, then maybe they closed the tab and they came back later. They're going to enter the same username. We don't need to create the user because it already exists, but we don't expect an error. So if we rerun this command, now we shouldn't be seeing an error, but we are. Let's debug this real quick. We can see that the error type is equal to services/chatkit/user already exists. Now what I tried to do earlier is make sure that if the error was equal to that we didn't actually relay the error. And I think what I've done is actually mistyped the error type. So let's save that real quick. Restart the server, and then we'll try this again, this time with a different username just to make sure. In fact, actually, we can use the username foo again. If we run this, we should see that we get an okay response. You'll notice that when we created the user for the first time, it said created. When we kind of relog in, we just see okay as successful, but we have some indication that the user wasn't created, but the request was successful. Next, we can go back to app.js. And instead of just alerting the username like we do here, we can send it to the server via a post request. First, let's create a function to handle the submission. And then update the onSubmit prop. We'll also need to create a constructor and make sure to bind this.onUsernameSubmitted to this. When the form is submitted, we're going to use the fetch function to send a post request to localhost port 3001/users. Fetch takes a second argument, which lets us specify the request method. We'll be sending a post request, as well as any headers, and of course the body of the request, which is going to be the username. When this function's finished executing, we're going to get the response. For now, we'll just write to the console success. If an error happens, we'll console.error the error. We'll also need to call super in the constructor. And then if we run the server, and we should see if we return to the application, reload the page and open the developer tools, but under the network tab, when we submit a username like bar, a post request is sent to the server and we get back a status code of 201 created. Imagine the user closes the tab and comes back and tries to enter their username again. We should see this time that we get 200 OK. So this is the exact same result we saw in the terminal earlier, but now we're seeing it in the browser, which is one step closer to completing our application. You know, right now when the user submits their username, nothing visibly happens. Really, when they send their username, after we send that post request successfully, we want to transition them to a different screen. We want to show them the chat application. So let's create another container component for that chat screen right now. We're going to create it in the source directory, and it's going to be called chatscreen.js. This is going to be a component like the ones we've defined before. So let's import React and then create a simple component. Within app.js, we'll want to import the chat screen. And then in the constructor, we're going to set some initial states. We're going to set a current screen property. And by default, that's going to be equal to what is your username screen. While we're here, we're also going to create another property for the current username. Basically, when the request has been successfully sent, we're going to want to come here and set the current username equal to the username submitted by the user. We need to store it in our application state so we can pass it to the chat screen component in just a second. We're also going to want to say that once the form has been successfully submitted, we're going to update the current screen to be the chat screen. That way, if we come down here to the render method, we can say if this.state.current screen is equal to what is your username screen, then we're going to return the username form. Otherwise, if this.state.current screen is equal to the chat screen, we're going to return the chat screen, and we're going to pass down the current username, which will be equal to this.state.current username. If I run the application, oh, and excuse me, I've made a typo here. We can enter a username like Bob, and when we hit submit, we'll see that after the request has been sent, we get rendered the chat screen. In fact, what we can do, which is kind of cool, is go to the chat screen component and we can access this.props.current username, and we could say something like hello current username, so that now if I sign in as like Booker and hit submit, you can see it says hello Booker. Moving on, we're going to need to install the ChatKit client SDK. And then import it inside of our chat screen component. Within component did mount, we're going to create a new chat manager. Just like when we instantiated ChatKit on the server, we have to specify our instance locator, which again we can access from the ChatKit dashboard. We also need to specify the user ID, which is going to be equal to this.props.current username, just like we referenced down here. We'll also need to provide a ChatKit token provider. And we're going to specify the URL to be http localhost 3001/authenticate. Now, as you can probably discern, this is pointing to the server we've been working on earlier, but we haven't created this authenticate route. I'm going to do this really quick, but I'm actually going to paste it from my clipboard as I'm not going to explain it in too much detail. If you're following along, copy this code exactly. Authentication is basically the act of proving a user is who he or she says she is. In a real application on your server, you would typically have some logic to kind of verify that the user is who he or she says she is. In our case, we're just going to assume everybody is who they say they are and return a ChatKit token no matter what. The ChatKit token is returned by this authenticate function, but that's all we really need to understand right now. Let's save that and go back to our chat screen. Here, now we have our chat manager. We can call chat manager.connect to connect to ChatKit. Once we've connected, we should get back the current ChatKit user, which right now I'm just going to print to the console. If something goes wrong, which isn't likely in this case, I'll write the error to the console just so we can do some debugging. Let's run this now to see what happens. What we should see is that when we reload the application and open the developer tools, if I connect as Booker, hit submit, we actually do get an error. We get a status code of 401 User ID mismatch, what? If something goes wrong, which isn't likely in this case, I think what's likely here is that we have a problem with the Authenticate endpoint, which is ironic because I copy and pasted it. I think what we need to do actually is specify a user ID property here and not pass an additional argument. If I save that and quickly restart the server, hopefully now we'll see when we reload the page and try and create an account and connect to ChatKit that we get the current user. Awesome. You can poke around here and kind of get a look at the stuff available to you when you're using ChatKit. But the basic idea now is that now we have this current user, we can start to perform actions in our chat. What we'll do firstly actually is head to the dashboard and to the inspector tab. The inspector is a simple tool to help you kind of do basic development and basic testing with ChatKit. What we're going to do is we're going to create a room. To create a room, we firstly have to create a user. It doesn't really matter. We're not going to actually use that user. And then we're going to create a room called general. When we create the room, we're going to see the room ID, which we should copy or at least keep open in this tab so we can reference it afterwards. I'm using the inspector to create a room for this tutorial just to keep things simple. But realistically, you are likely to create your rooms programmatically. If you look at the docs for the Node SDK or even the client-side JavaScript SDK, there are functions you can call to create rooms. I just want to keep things simple, so I'm using the dashboard right here. Now in a second, we're going to make it so that we can subscribe to messages that are sent in that room. But first, I'm going to create a new component in the components directory called messagelist.js. And this is going to be the component responsible for rendering a list of messages for a particular conversation or room. The basic idea here is that in the render function, we're going to return a container, and then we're going to take a messages prop that we expect whoever's referencing this component to pass down, and we're going to map each message to a list item element. Actually, let's make this a UL instead of a div. All right, now I'm going to go back to chat screen and I'm going to create a constructor for this component where I'll set some initial states. In particular, we want to create a messages property. Then, once we've successfully connected to ChatKit, rather than just print out the current user, we're actually going to write current user.subscribe to room. We'll specify the room ID to be the room ID that we copied just a second ago from the dashboard. We'll specify the message limit to be 100, and I'll explain this property a bit more in a second. And then we're going to create a hooks property, hooks, not books, where when a new message is received, we're going to call this.setState, and we're going to take that new message and we're going to essentially add it to the existing messages array. I'm going to quickly make sure that I return the promise returned by subscribe to room, so that down here I can call then and access the current room. We'll need this in just a little bit, most likely. Next, what I'm going to do is go down to the render function and I'm going to render the message list. In fact, let's import it real quick from components/message list. And then down here, I can reference the message list and say the messages are equal to this.state.messages. Now what we should see if we save this file and run the application is that after I reference super, which I always forget for some reason, we should be able to go to the app, reload the page, create a new user or sign in with an existing user. And then from within the ChatKit dashboard, we can actually send some test messages. So if I send the text hello right here and go back to this tab, you can see that the user called ChatKit dashboard has written the text hello. In fact, if I open up these windows side by side, you can see that as I type messages and hit save, this interface is updated in real time. The next step is to enable the user to enter the message rather than using the dashboard. This inspect is handy just as a kind of sanity check. We want to make sure that we are subscribing to messages successfully, so we can send a test message and make sure it registers. The formatting is a bit weird, but we'll fix that in just a little bit. Let's give our user a way to send a message. Before they can send a message, we need to kind of capture the text, which we'll do using a form. So let's create a new component in the components folder called sendMessageForm.js. And actually, this is going to be incredibly similar to the username form we defined earlier. So to save some time, I'm actually going to open up that username form, copy the contents, paste it into the send message form, and then just do a bit of refactoring. If I then go to chatscreen.js, I can import the send message form. And then at the bottom here in the render function, I can render that send message form. And we'll say on submit, let's take the text and let's alert it just to make sure things are working fine. So if I sign in as Booker, you'll notice quickly that as I reconnect, I get to see all of the previous ChatKit messages. You might recall that earlier inside of the chat screen file, we specified a message limit of 100. I just want to use this opportunity to mention that whenever you connect to a ChatKit room, you have the option to see retroactive messages, or to see old historical messages for which the onNewMessage function is called retroactively. That's kind of cool. But yeah, you can see here that we have this what is your text form. If we type some text and hit submit, we get to see our text. But yeah, let's actually send this text to ChatKit. Now, before we do that, let me quickly make a few tweaks to our application state. I'm going to create two new state properties, current room and current user. Once we successfully connect, I want to say this.setState and set the current user on our state. Down here, you might recall that earlier I deliberately created this then function, so that now I can come here and say setState current room. This will give us wider access to the current room and current user properties. So that in this case, I can replace the arrow function here with a call to this.sendMessage. I can then create a send message function that takes some text and say this.state.currentUser.sendMessage. We can access current user now, you can see. We can also say that the room ID should be equal to this.state.currentRoom, which we now have access to, .id. And then we'll specify the text to be equal to the text submitted by the form. Before this will run, we need to come up here and say this.sendMessage equals this.sendMessage.bindThis. We're pretty used to doing this by now. Let's save that, run the application, and see what happens. If I type the text hello and hit submit, you can see that the message shows up right here. What's kind of cool is if I open up two windows and create another user called Ham, we can see the text I wrote previously, and we can start to talk with each other. It's like, hi, I'm Ham. Oh, hey, Ham. Nice to meet you. You get the idea. The next thing we'll want to add to our chat application is typing indicators. Now, adding typing indicators with ChatKit is actually pretty straightforward. It really boils down to two distinct steps. Firstly, whenever the user starts typing, so if I'm typing in this field, we need to broadcast an event that tells ChatKit that a user is typing. The second distinct step is to essentially subscribe to that event, so that if, for example, I'm typing in this left-hand window, the other client's application will receive an event to say, hey, Booker's typing. Based on that, we can update our UI to show the user who else is typing in a particular room or conversation. We'll integrate with ChatKit in just a second, and things will come together quite swiftly. But first, we need to make a small tweak to our send message form. We need a way to be notified whenever the user types a character. In other words, whenever the input value is changed. We can't do that right now. This onChange prop doesn't exist. So we'll quickly add it by going to the components folder and the send message form components. And then inside of this onChange function, we're going to call this.props.onChange every time the input is updated. Such that now, if I go back to the chat screen and back to the render function right here, just to test things are working, I can pass an arrow function which just writes to the console updated. You'll notice that we're not actually capturing the value of the text input simply because we don't really need it for this, and we can always access it via the onSubmit property function anyway. But yeah, let me just quickly test this before we go any further. We've seen a few errors today. It's always good to do a little sanity check. If I just pop open the developer tools here and quickly enter my username, we should see that whenever I type, this updated message is written to the console. That's a great first step. But actually, we're not too interested in just writing some text to the console. What we actually want to do is every time the value is updated, we're going to want to send a typing event, which we'll do via this function. From here, we can access the current user, and we call a function called isTypingIn, and we specify the room ID the user is typing in, which of course we can access via this.state.currentroom.id. And really, that's all we have to do. Fundamentally, once we have the event, this really boils down to one significant line of code, which is pretty cool. In fact, we'll also just catch an error, just in case we need to do some debugging. Oh, and of course, as ever, we need to come up to the constructor and bind the function we just defined, namely sendTypingEvent, to this. So yeah, that's the first significant step, and as you can see, it's not even that significant. The next thing we need to do is to be notified when another user is typing so we can update our user interface. Now, it's very possible that there will be multiple users typing at the same time, and to keep track of this, I'm going to create a new state property called users who are typing, and that's going to be an array. We will update this state in just a second, but first we need a way to be notified whenever a user starts or stops typing. And the way we do that with ChatKit is by specifying a hook. Earlier, we specified an onNewMessage event handler essentially that's called whenever a new message is sent. We can also specify an event handler for when a user started typing. This event handler receives the user that currently started typing. We can also specify an onUserStopTyping event handler, where again, this is the user that stopped typing basically. To kind of test this out real quick, we can just write to the console. Let's just write user started typing. And in this case, user stopped typing. If we save this and quickly run the application, in fact, let me quickly change this from user to user.name. What we can see is that if I reload the app and then in one window sign in as Booker, and in this other window sign in as let's just call it test user to avoid any kind of confusion. As I start to type as test user, you can see in the left-hand window there in the console, the test user started typing. I've not stopped typing yet. As soon as I move my hand from the keyboard, we get an event that says test user stop typing. Conversely, if I open up the console as test user and I start typing as myself, as Booker, you can see the exact same event for the other user. However, we do not see that event for the current user because there's no benefit really in notifying the current user that they are currently typing. Of course, they know they're typing, they're the ones typing with their keyboard. The other kind of interesting thing which you might have noticed is that there was and is no need to kind of broadcast an event that says, hey, the user has stopped typing. ChatKit can figure it out based on how long it's been since it received an event to say that a user is typing, which is kind of neat. But yeah, these events are clearly hooked up correctly. That's awesome. It's now up to us to update our application state so we can update the user interface. For example, in this case, when the user starts typing, what we essentially want to do is add their username to the users who are typing array, which we can do using the same technique we saw earlier with the message lists. When the user stops typing, we're going to want to remove their username from that array. What we should be able to do now is go to the render function, and then just above the send message form, we can say this.state.users who are typing. And if we serialize it using json.stringify, we should be able to just preview this really quickly in our user interface before we move on to creating an actual typing indicator component where we can render it in a more proper way. So yeah, let's test this real quick. Just log in as Booker and then as test. Yeah, we can see the bottom here, these kind of empty parentheses. That's being rendered by React because right now there are no users typing. As soon as I start typing as test, you can see in the left window there, the test is typing. I can start typing, you can see in the right window that Booker's typing. Same kind of thing we saw before, but now it's in our UI. And what we really want to do is create a new component called typingindicator.js, where we can pass that users who are typing object down to and render it properly. What we'll do is we'll say if this.props.users who are typing.length is equal to 0, then we know that there is no one typing and we can just return an empty div. Otherwise, if this.props.users who are typing.length is equal to 1, we know that there's currently one user typing, and we can return a paragraph tag which is like this.props.users who are typing will bring out that first username and then just concatenate is typing ... If there are more than one users typing, what we'll want to do is a little bit more tricky but still very simple. We'll say this.props.users who are typing.join, and what we'll do is we'll just join them. What this join function does basically is it takes the array and it returns back a string with each element in the array joined with this particular tag. So if two users are typing, say Bob and Jim are typing, it'll say Bob and Jim are typing. We won't really get to experience this in this screencast. It'll be quite hard to demonstrate, but I'm pretty sure it'll work fine. Now, if we go back to chatscreen.js and import typing indicator, instead of just rendering the text, we can render the typing indicator component, specify users who are typing is equal to this.state.users who are typing. And what we should see when we run this application is a much more proper formatting for the list of users who are typing instead of just an array, basically. Oh, I forgot to run the server. All right, so if I start typing, we can see Ham is typing. If I start typing as Booker, we can see the Booker's typing. It's really hard to demonstrate, but because I can't really type at the same time with one keyboard, but if there were multiple users typing, we should see that, Bob and Jim are typing. Looking at the application in front of us, from a visual standpoint, there's clearly a bit of work left to do, but from a feature point of view, there's only really one more feature we need to add, and that's a who's online list, where we can see a list of users who've ever joined this chat, as well as their online status. Let's add that next. I'm not going to spend too much time on nitty-gritty styling, but I think it might be useful to create a basic layout for our application. After all, what we really want to see is a sidebar on the left here, where we can show a list of online users, and then on the right-hand side, we can show the chat messages, as well as the chat send message form. So before integrating with ChatKit, let's set up a basic UI layout. What I'm going to do is create a style property on this container div. I'm going to set the display property to flex. We'll be using Flexbox to set up the layout of our application. Within that container, I'm going to create a new kind of sub-container for all of the elements that I want to be on the right-hand side of the page. Above that, I'll create another container, this time for the Who's Online list, which I'm going to style very simply by specifying that I want the width to be 30% of the width of the viewports. And just to kind of give us some visual indication of what's happening, I'm going to set a background color here and see what happens. So if I log in now, we can see that we have this Who's Online list on the left and then our chat messages on the right. The first thing that comes to mind is that obviously if this isn't filling the full height of the page, we can fix that really easily by setting the height property to 100 VH. That looks good to me. One more small UI layout thing I'll fix is obviously this text input should probably be anchored to the bottom. And the way we can do that is by coming down here, wrapping the message list in its own container with a style property. And we're just going to set the flex property to 1. Well, clearly that didn't work. That's because I actually need to make sure that on the container here, I set the display to flex and I set the flex direction to column. There we go. You can see that it's pushed down to the bottom. Obviously it needs some padding and some additional styles. We'll tackle that afterwards. What that flex1 property I just added does basically is it tells the browser to make the message list occupy all of the space it can while still leaving room for any other elements. And because it has that flex1 property, it kind of dominates. As you might have guessed by this point, we're going to create a new component called Who's Online List.js. The idea here is that we're going to pass down a list of users. We're going to check if that user's property exists. If it does, we'll return the list, but otherwise, we're going to return the text loading. We could return nothing and just render an empty screen, but it might be nice to show the loading status. And then what we're going to do if there are some users is we're going to return a list. Inside that list, we're going to take each user and map that user to a list item. I expect we'll want to make some tweaks to this component, but for now let's head back to chat screen and import the Who's Online list component. Then down here in the render function, instead of just rendering the text Who's Online list, let's actually render the Who's Online list. And we're going to pass down the user's property, which is going to be equal to this.state.currentroom.users. And this is actually quite a magical property. The reason I say that is that normally in our React application, for example, when it comes to a list of users who are currently typing, we have to manage that state ourselves. We're always adding or removing items from an array or an object. When it comes to managing users, there's no need to manage that state ourselves because the ChatKit client SDK does that for us. This user's property is always up to date. It always reflects the up-to-date state of your chat application. So whenever someone joins, they get added to this property. If their online status changes, whether they go offline or come back online, it's completely reflected by this property. Which means that when it comes to updating our user interface, all we really have to do, because obviously when someone comes online or goes offline, we want to update our user interface. We can use hooks like we did for the typing events. So we can say when a user comes online, rather than updating any kind of state, all we really have to do is call this.forceUpdate. And what that's going to do in turn, the same for when a user went offline or whenever a user joined for that matter, whenever any of these events happen, we're going to call force update. And what that really translates to in React speak is call this render function again. And when this render function gets called again, the user's property gets evaluated again, and that should reflect the state of our application. In fact, one thing, and like I said, we probably were going to end up tweaking that who's online list. One thing we can do is we can come back down here where we return the list item with the username, and in parentheses, we can render the user.presence.state, which is either going to be online or offline. We just made a lot of changes at once, so we'll see what happens when we run the application. Yeah, I kind of expected after writing that much code, I probably made a typo, which is quite an easy fix. If I go to chat screen, and I think I just need to add commas at the end of each of these statements. But once that's up and running successfully, oops, and again, I need to call super. Always forget to do that. Actually, this component doesn't even have a constructor. It's because I mistyped component here, I think. Cool, let's see what happens if I log in. We see that loading text once we're connected. Now this is cool. We see a list of all the users who've ever joined this room. Like throughout this tutorial, I connected as ham, then as test, then as test user. If I open another window real quick, now watch this. Take a look at test user right here. Currently test user's offline. But as soon as I join, that offline text changes to online, which is super cool. The other cool thing is that if I hit back here, basically closing the chat app, pay attention to test user's online status, boom, test user goes offline. One more thing I want to test is that if I create a new user and I join the room, we should see that new user, yes, gets added to the list of online users, and that pretty much integrates with the same kind of system. You know, if we close the tab, that user appears offline. Wicked. That looks awesome to me. I'm going to pause the screencast and I'm going to take a bit of time off camera making this chat application look a bit better, but all the basic functionality is there, which I'm really excited about. All right, I made some updates. If I run the application and log back in, you can see it looks a lot better now. Trust me, you might think it would have been nice to see me add the style step by step, but it was fiddly, a bit boring, and really a bit outside the scope of this tutorial. Besides, the complete code is on GitHub where you can browse it, download it, adapt it, maybe even use it as the foundation for your next app. ChatKit is a tool I'm helping to build at Pusher. I'm really excited about it. If you think it can save you time and help you build a better product faster, the team and I would love to help. You are very, very welcome to join our Slack channel where you can reach the team and I directly with your questions. There'll be a link in the description. As well, on all of our documentation pages, we have a chat if you want to pop up there. Of course, I would love to hear your thoughts about this video or indeed ChatKit in the comments section as well. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you found it interesting. I've been Alex Booker. Goodbye.